The rural community of Carp, Ontario lies roughly 30 minutes west of Ottawa in Canada. Home to just over 2,500 residents, most of the region is occupied by farmland and forest. Perhaps most notable is the site of a now decommissioned nuclear bunker designed to protect Canadian government officials during the Cold War. Today, Carp is a popular tourist destination for those from the surrounding region looking to get away from the city or visit the local farmers market. But in the early 1990s, Carp was becoming a hotbed of activity for an entirely different kind of sightseer. Spurred on by dramatic tales of an alien encounter that would later be picked up by multiple television programs, investigators from both Canada and the United States packed their bags and made off to the small farm town in hopes of being the ones to discover answers to the growing mystery. Over 30 years later, many UFO enthusiasts still remember the shocking video footage that was first aired on a February 1993 episode of Unsolved Mysteries. The video, which has since come to be known as the Guardian Tape, was among the most provocative recordings of an unidentified craft available at the time. But what exactly was it that took place in the remote swampland just a short drive from the nation's capital? Were the lights seen in the sky and caught on video really caused by an alien craft piloted by life forms from another world? Who was the person responsible for filming the event? And what exactly can be said, with 3 decades of hindsight, about what has come to be known as one of Canada's most well-documented, though perhaps most misunderstood, encounters with an unidentified flying object? This is the story, as fully as it's ever been told, of the Guardian case. The incident at the center of the Carp UFO case took place on the evening of August 18, 1991. With her husband out running an errand and her 2 children having just been put to bed, local resident Diane Labanek was enjoying a moment of quiet at the end of a hot summer's day. This silence was broken, however, around 10 p.m. when the sound of her dogs barking outside alerted Diane that something extraordinary was happening in the fields behind her home. When she went to a window to investigate, what she saw she could not explain. In Diane's recollection of the event, her initial impression was of a dense collection of red flames burning towards the back end of her property in clouds of billowing smoke, though right away she could tell that the fire was not like any she had ever seen before. I know what a fire looks like when you start a fire out there, and the grass was very dry, so if you start a fire, you'll see it moving, whether this way or that way closer to the woods. The fire was staying in one spot only. It's at this time that Diane's experience would go from unusual to something that she would not be able to forget even decades later. I saw a ship coming down close to the flames. Right on top of the ship, I saw a blue flashing light, and another light was on the bottom, very bright. I didn't know what to do. Staring in disbelief from the window in her home, Diane continued to observe the unidentified craft for roughly 10 minutes before she claims that it lifted up over the trees and moved on out of sight. It was at this time that the red flames suddenly went out, as though extinguished all at once. Feeling shaken from what she'd just witnessed, Diane considered reporting the incident to the authorities. However, her own uncertainties about what she'd just seen, coupled with the fear of not being taken seriously, kept her from filing any kind of official report at the time. It did enter my mind to phone the police. When this was all over, I came to the telephone, but I said, what am I going to tell them? I'm going to tell them I've seen flares out there at 10 o'clock or past 10 o'clock at night and there was a ship up there? Who's going to say, okay, Diane, that's fine, we're coming over. So that's why I didn't call. The field where Diane had witnessed the fires and the craft had gone quiet and dark when roughly 10 minutes later the sound of an approaching helicopter could be heard in the skies above her home. Unsure to this day from where this helicopter had been dispatched, Diane claims that it crossed over the field where the unidentified craft had been seen just minutes earlier, before turning around and flying directly over her house and returning from the direction it had came. The following day, with the field behind her home brightly lit in the morning sun, Diane went out to the area where she'd seen the strange lights, hoping to find some trace of the unusual craft that she'd seen the night before. Anything that could help prove that the unexplainable sight that she'd seen from her kitchen window had really taken place. I searched everything. There was no marks, there was no spots, there was no matches, there was just nothing. With only her own solitary eyewitness account and no physical evidence that anything unusual had taken place on her property the previous evening, Diane felt she had no choice but to reluctantly accept that she would not be able to get answers to the many questions that had been brought to her mind by what she had seen. The only person I told was my mom and my husband. It kind of bothered me inside for a long time not to come forward and say it to anybody, but when I went out to the field and I could not find anything, who was going to believe me that this really happened? So I kept it to myself. Though Diane may have thought at the time that this would be where the story of her encounter would end, a UFO investigator calling themselves Guardian was about to spur on what would become an international investigation by providing evidence that they claimed proved that the event witnessed on Diane Labenek's property had in fact been the landing of an alien spaceship, complete with stories of conspiracy and an accompanying government cover-up. Roughly 7 months and over 500 miles from the location of Diane Labenek's encounter, a UFO investigator by the name of Bob Exler stepped forward with a videotape that in just a few short years would come to be seen by millions. Exler, who previously had worked as a roboticist and engineer with NASA, reported that the tape had arrived in a package addressed to his home in Maryland in the United States, along with documents that pointed to Carp, Ontario as being the location where the footage had been captured. The tape itself was labeled with just a single word, Guardian, and signed with a fingerprint believed to have been made by its creator. The contents of the film were unlike anything Bob Exler had seen at the time. Admittedly shaky and poorly lit, video analysis later conducted on the tape revealed no signs of doctoring or video editing. Taken in a wooded location in the dark of night, the bright light of what appears to be flares can be seen coming from a clearing up ahead. The camera operator appears to take a few uncertain steps towards the light. Next to the flares, a large unknown object can be seen, itself brightly lit from below by green-blue lights and capped by a rapidly strobing blue light. The object, whatever it was, appears to be disc-like in shape and measure approximately 20 to 30 feet in diameter. As it hovered silently next to the flares, the only sound that could be heard were the distant sounds of dogs barking, possibly the same dogs that alerted Diane to the incident occurring in the field behind her home. As the tape continues, the craft even appears to shine a light directly at the person filming, creating a large lens flare effect in the footage. The tape, while far from being conclusive evidence of an alien visitation, was enough to prompt Exler to investigate further. I got a sense originally that this was a real event occurring in a field, as opposed to some prop set up in a room somewhere. It had such an extraordinary amount of luminosity characteristic to it that I kind of had a sense it might be dealing with something that was potentially authentic here. Exler would later describe the video as being among the most convincing documentations of a UFO he had seen in his 12 years of research. Following the map provided by Guardian, Bob Exler crossed into Canada and made for Carp, the location where the footage was claimed to have been filmed. Accompanying him was local UFO investigator Graham Lightfoot. Lightfoot was extremely familiar with the area, and with his help the pair began to interview locals about unusual experiences they had had in the area. It was in this way that on May 11, 1992, Bob Exler would first come to meet Diane Labenek. At the time, Exler was not aware of the sighting that Labenek had had several months earlier, so when Diane began to recount the tale of her encounter, which matched so closely the events captured in the film, he knew that he and Lightfoot had found what they were looking for. It was at this time that Exler revealed that he was in possession of the Guardian tape, which may itself be the proof that Diane had been searching for. And And when he showed me the tape, it was exactly what I've seen. And it was still scary for me, but at least I had something to go by. Something that now I can tell the people, because now I have a little bit more evidence. Less than a year later, on February 3rd, 1993, the tape was shown to the public for the first time via a broadcast of the American television program Unsolved Mysteries, a popular show at the time that delved into the unexplained, from tales of true crime to accounts of experiences with the paranormal. The episode featuring the Guardian case contained interviews with Diane Labinek, Bob Exler, and Graham Lightfoot, as well as a recreation of Diane Labinek's eyewitness encounter on August 18, 1991, played by Diane herself. The focal point of the episode was on the mysterious Guardian tape, which Exler and Labinek were now certain depicted what Diane had seen in the fields behind her home nearly 2 years earlier. What followed were interviews with Canadian and American military officials who both analyzed the evidence and discussed the potential legitimacy of the event. The experts interviewed were unable to positively identify what was shown in the tape, nor were they able to categorically dismiss its contents as a hoax. While the show was careful to point out a few red flags that might lead some to question Guardian's credibility, including some rather eyebrow-raising documents that had arrived along with the tape, a mainstream television program taking seriously eyewitness accounts of flying discs was not something that audiences at home were used to seeing at the time that the episode first aired. For many who saw the episode, it would form the beginning of a lifelong interest in the topic of potential alien visitations and the unidentified objects in the skies above our head. Today, nearly 30 years after it was first broadcast on television, the now infamous video shown on Unsolved Mysteries, as well as the details discussed in the episode, are what many UFO enthusiasts will remember at the mention of the strange sighting that took place in Carp in the early 90s. But the evidence presented at the time was not all there was to be told about the Guardian case. Over the years that followed the original airing of the Guardian footage on Canadian and American television, investigators would come to discover intriguing new details that would change the way they viewed the alleged event. In truth, the full story of Guardian and UFO activity in Carp was even stranger and even more incredible than audiences at home would have otherwise imagined. At the center of the strange incident that took place on the Labinek property is the individual known only as Guardian. While it was the tape that Guardian sent to Bob Exler that led to the case becoming known to the public, it was not the first time that strange documents had been received from an individual using the alias. A little over 1 year before Exler would receive the package that led him to Carp, Ontario, a similar package sent by Guardian was received by the Canadian UFO Research Network, QFORN. Just like the envelope received by Exler, no return address was provided, nor did the contents contain any instruction on how to contact the sender. Included instead was a letter containing a dramatic retelling of an alleged UFO crash that took place on the evening of November 4th, 1989. Remarkably, the location given as the crash site for the alien craft was the same patch of swampland in Carp that would become the site of Diane's eyewitness encounter just 2 years later. But this was not the most incredible claim laid out in the documents, not even close. According to Guardian's letter, both Canadian and American security officials were collaborating to orchestrate a massive cover-up designed to hide evidence of a crashed UFO and a recovery operation that saw the retrieval of not just an otherworldly vessel, but of 3 gray-skinned humanoid alien bodies as well. These aliens, according to Guardian, were evolutionary cousins to dinosaurs who had left the Earth over 600 million years prior to escape an interdimensional war, and who had returned to recolonize a planet that they still considered their own. Guardian claimed that the recovered craft was a highly weaponized alien vessel powered by cold fusion technology. According to Guardian, the craft was being used to transport 50 Soviet nuclear weapons as part of an elaborate plan between China and the extraterrestrials, with the goal of creating a global conflict from which Chinese and alien forces would emerge as the undisputed rulers of Earth. Why invading alien forces would need to ally themselves with the Chinese, or any other earthly government, was left unclear. Guardian warned that alien forces, along with their allies, would launch their attack within 5 years, stating that the aliens were concerned that waiting any longer would give humanity too much time to continue damaging the Earth's natural environment, something that apparently not even alien technology would be able to correct. Notably, a global alien invasion backed by China did not occur in the 5 years that followed in the first of Guardian's communications. Many who read the documents agreed that they read like wild science fiction. A dubious photo included with Guardian's letter that claimed to show a gray alien that had been captured in the field surrounding the crash site did little to bolster investigators' confidence in the extraordinary claims. However, intrigued by the possibility of the crash landing of an alien spacecraft, the Canadian UFO researchers at QFORN decided to send someone to CARP to investigate. It was at this point, in fact, that Graham Lightfoot, who would later serve as a guide to the area for Bob Exler in '91, would first become involved in the Guardian case. While interviewing residents of the area in an attempt to locate potential witnesses to the incident alleged to have taken place on November 4th, 1989, Lightfoot even spoke to Diane Labenek, who claimed that a brilliant bright light had passed over her house before heading off toward the swamp at the far end of her property. Interestingly, Diane was not the only person in the area to report having seen something strange that day. One couple also reported seeing an extremely bright light, while a local farmer reported that their cattle had been upset that evening by an unknown disturbance. Still, others interviewed by Lightfoot reported absolutely nothing unusual. Ultimately, in his report back to QFORN, Lightfoot would have to conclude that there just wasn't enough physical evidence to back up any of the eyewitnesses' claims. While other groups with an interest in UFOs would receive similar packages from Guardian, they would each come respectively to the same conclusion: the Guardian's claim of a crashed UFO in 1989 was likely no more than a wild fantasy. For a short while after the initial documents had been received, Guardian went silent. But then, starting in October 1991, more packages signed with the familiar alias and fingerprint began to appear. The first package contained a letter which warned of a now familiar plot between China and gray aliens with the goal of world domination. Later, 2 more packages would arrive containing a photograph of an alleged UFO and alien beings. The fourth and final package received from Guardian by QFORN would include the now infamous Guardian tape. The tape, wrapped in an accompanying map and a collection of military documents that appeared to originate from the Canadian Department of National Defence, contained the same footage that would later arrive at the home of Bob Exler, spurring on the events that would lead to the video being broadcast to millions of homes across Canada and the United States. The military documents that accompanied the Guardian tape, however, were extremely dubious. Disregarding for a moment the extraordinary tale of an alliance between Chinese and alien military forces suggested by their contents, the authenticity of the documents themselves was quickly brought into question. Even at first glance, UFO investigators could tell that the documents received from Guardian did not have the typical appearance of the government documents they had become accustomed to seeing in their research. Upon investigating further, the presence of numerous errors in both spelling and style were enough for many to conclude that the documents had been faked. This document is clearly a fabrication. There are way too many errors in the document to make it authentic. Someone with very little effort could have come a lot closer than this. But for many, the inclusion of demonstrably fake military documents with the Guardian tape, along with the highly questionable documents received from Guardian prior, were not enough for them to dismiss the footage outright. Instead, they only seemed to deepen the mystery. But that posed a major question. If in fact the video images of the disc were authentic, why would anyone contaminate such an extraordinary event with fake images of alien creatures? Why indeed? Not long after first viewing an advanced copy of the 1993 Unsolved Mysteries episode, Canadian ufologist Graham Lightfoot got a call from an Ottawa resident claiming to have information on Guardian. When Lightfoot arranged a meeting to investigate the lead, he was given the name of CARP resident Bobby Charbois. According to the informant, not only had Charbois been an avid UFO enthusiast for many years, but he'd also been known to use the alias Guardian when discussing the UFO phenomenon in the past. As more became known about Bobby Charbois, it became increasingly apparent that he was likely involved in some way. Investigators would learn that Charbois not only had access to the site where the Guardian footage was alleged to have taken place, but also that he was well known to several of the witnesses of the incident that occurred on Diane Labenek's property in August 1991. Diane would eventually disclose that she and Charbois were in fact good friends who had known each other for some time and who visited often. Lightfoot would attempt to put the case to rest by speaking to Charbois, but his efforts would go unrewarded. I think I know who Guardian is. He's known in the area for talking about the issue for forever, for 40 years. He's never admitted his involvement in this story to my knowledge. I've tried to see him, but he won't even answer the door. Over the next few months, efforts between Exler, local news reporters, and Canadian police officials were made to conclusively identify Bobby Charbois as having been the elusive and mysterious Guardian. These efforts centered primarily around attempts to collect Charbois' fingerprints, which he had declined to provide willingly, in hopes of matching them to the print Guardian had used to sign the video of the alleged event. In one incident, provincial police found that when a package known to have been in Charbois' possession was tested for fingerprints, that none could be found, with the package apparently having been intentionally wiped clean. A comment made later by Diane Labenek, stating that Charbois was known to wipe his fingerprints from used glassware, seemed to back up the idea that Charbois was being intentionally evasive. While the Guardian thumbprint was analyzed by Canadian police, no matches were ever made with any of the prints that law enforcement had on file. With efforts to collect a testable print from Charbois unsuccessful, some discussion was had as to whether the threat of being charged with forging national security documents might make him more willing to cooperate. Ultimately, however, police investigating decided not to do so, and as a result, any hopes that Bobby Charbois could be conclusively linked with the individual calling themselves Guardian seemed to be lost. In the years that followed, Guardian was not heard from again. To this day, no further information has been received from anyone using the alias, nor have any further clues emerged that might lead to discovering who the mysterious figure really was. To many, Bobby Charbois' access to the area and keen interest in UFOs seemed to provide him with both the means and the motive to perpetrate what was seen in the now infamous Guardian tape. Further, his connection with Diane and his unwillingness to cooperate with official investigations into the matter seemed to suggest at least some level of involvement or knowledge of the case. I think it was probably done as a game. It was just fun. It was something to do. Can we do it? And going by the video, I'd say they did a pretty good job. Nearly 30 years after the strange events that took place in the fields of Carpentaria, there's still no definitive answer as to whether the alleged sightings and mysterious packages received by ufologists were simply the creation of an imaginative mind, or if in fact they represented genuine evidence of something truly out of this world. While some may speculate, as more and more time continues to separate any future investigations from the unusual episode on the Labenek property, it becomes increasingly unlikely that such answers will ever be known with absolute certainty. Today, the consensus among those who have studied the case is that the object seen on the Guardian tape was most likely some kind of sophisticated hoax. Experts in photographic analysis have concluded that the object was probably a pickup truck, or, according to Canadian police officials, perhaps even a helicopter, that had been rigged with numerous bright lights to create what was seen in the footage. Despite the international attention that the case would receive over the years, for many the tales of two separate UFO landings on the same patch of remote swampland on the Labenek property 2 years apart is simply too hard to believe. Still, many who claim to have witnessed the events not only continue to insist that they really did take place, but have provided testimony that could be corroborated with others. Among UFO enthusiasts, the questionable nature of the supplementary documents and photographs provided with the Guardian tape have left many scratching their heads. The stories that he writes to go along with the events don't seem to match the quality of the event itself, if that makes any sense. The stories are rather far-fetched, and yet the events are seen by credible witnesses. While the investigation by Canadian police officials never did conclusively identify Guardian, they were able to find significant evidence to back up claims of unusual helicopter activity spotted in the area. Canadian military officials have acknowledged running helicopter exercises not far from the site of the alleged landing. However, no such exercises were found to have taken place on the evening of Diane's encounter. Oddly, even after the media frenzy of the early 1990s, residents continued to report unexplained phenomenon in the area around Carp, Ontario. More unidentified helicopters, cattle gone missing from farmers' fields in the middle of the night, and even an alien abduction alleged to have taken place within 24 hours of when Diane had her encounter in 1991. Were all these incidents part of an elaborate hoax intended to give the impression of an alien visitation? Was Guardian responsible for staging what was seen in the famous video footage? Or did they perhaps simply misidentify a military craft taking part in a standard training exercise? With the mysterious figure responsible for filming the event having seemingly dropped off the radar since the early 90s, it is likely that the true details of what really took place will forever remain shrouded in mystery.